Lockheed F-104 Starfighter is an American single-engine supersonic interceptor which was extensively deployed as a fighter-bomber during the Cold War. Created as a day fighter by Lockheed as one of the Century Series, quote-unquote, of fighter aircraft for the United States Air Force, it was developed into an all-weather multi-role aircraft in the early 1960s and produced by several other nations, seeing widespread service outside the United States. After a series of interviews with Korean warfighter pilots in 1951, Kelly Johnson, then lead designer at Lockheed, opted to reverse the trend of ever larger and more complex fighters to produce a simple, lightweight aircraft with maximum altitude and climb performance. On the 4th of March, 1954, the Lockheed XF-104 took to the skies for the first time, and on the 26th of February, 1958, the production fighter was activated by the United States Air Force. Just a few months later, it was passed into action during the Second Taiwan Strait crisis, when it was deployed as a deterrent to the Chinese MiG-15 and MiG-17 fighters. Problems with the General Electric J79 engine and a preference for fighters with longer ranges and heavier payloads meant that its service with the United States Air Force was short-lived. Though it was reactivated for service during the Berlin crisis of 1961 and the Vietnam War when it flew more than 5,000 combat sorties. While its time with the United States Air Force was brief, the Starfighter found much more lasting success with other NATO and Allied nations. In October 1958, West Germany selected the F-104 as its primary fighter aircraft. Canada soon followed, along with the Netherlands, Belgium, Japan, and Italy. The European nations formed a construction consortium that was the largest international manufacturing program in history to that point. Though the Starfighter's export success was marred in 1975 by the discovery of bribe payments made by Lockheed to many foreign military and political figures for securing purchase contracts. Wouldn't be the first time, probably isn't the last time. That military-industrial complex gotta keep the military cog moving. The Starfighter eventually flew with 15 air forces, but its poor safety record, especially in Luftwaffe service, brought it to substantial criticism. The Germans lost 292 of 916 aircraft and 116 pilots from 1961 to 1989. Its high accident rate earning it the nickname Witwenmacher, or Widowmaker, from the German public. The final production version, the F-104S, was an all-weather interceptor built by Aerodynamic for the Italian Air Force. It was retired from active service in 2004, though several F-104s remain in civilian operation with Florida-based Starfighter, Inc. The Starfighter featured a radical design, with thin, stubby wings attached further back on the fuselage than most contemporary aircraft. The wing provided excellent supersonic and high-speed, low-altitude performance, but also poor turning capability and high landing speeds. It was the first production aircraft to reach Mach 2 and the first aircraft to reach an altitude of 100,000 feet, or 30,000 meters, after taking off under its own power. The Starfighter established world records for airspeed, altitude, and time to climb in 1958, becoming the first aircraft to hold all three simultaneously. It was also the first aircraft to be equipped with the M61 Vulcan autocannon. Clarence L. Kelly, quote-unquote, Johnson, Vice President of Engineering and Research at Lockheed Skunk Works, visited United States Air Force bases across South Korea in November 1951 to speak with fighter pilots about what they wanted and needed in a fighter aircraft. At the time, the American pilots were confronting the MiG-15 with North American F-86 Sabres. Many felt that the MiGs were superior to the larger and more complex American fighters. The pilots requested a small and simple aircraft with excellent performance, especially high speed and high altitude capabilities. Johnson started the design of such an aircraft upon his return to the United States. In March 1952, his team was assembled. They studied over 100 aircraft configurations ranging from small designs at just 8,000 pounds or 3,600 kilograms to large ones up to 50,000 pounds or 23,000 kilograms. To achieve the desired performance, Lockheed chose a small, simple aircraft weighing in at about 12,000 pounds or 5,400 kilograms with a single powerful engine. The engine chosen was the new General Electric J79 turbojet, an engine of dramatically improved performance in comparison with contemporary designs. The small design, powered by a single J79, issued temporary design number L246, remained essentially identical to the prototype Starfighter as eventually delivered. Lockheed designated the prototype Model 083. Johnson presented his new fighter concept to United States Air Force on the 5th of November 1952, and they were interested enough to create a general operational requirement for a lightweight fighter to supplement and ultimately replace the yet-to-fly North American F-100. These additional companies were named finalists for the requirement: Republic Aviation with the AP-55, an improved version of its prototype XF-91 Thunderceptor; North American Aviation with the NA-212, which eventually evolved into the F-107, and Northrop Corporation with the N-102 Fang, another J-79 powered entry. Although all three finalists' proposals were strong, Lockheed had what proved to be an insurmountable head start and was granted a development contract on the 12th of March 1953 for two prototypes. These were given the designation XF-104. Work progressed quickly, with a mock-up ready for inspection at the end of April, and work starting on two prototypes soon after. Meanwhile, the J-79 engine was not ready. Both prototypes were instead built to use the Wright J-65 engine, a licensed-constructed version of the Armstrong Siddeley Sapphire. The first prototype was completed at Lockheed's Burbank facility by early 1954 and first flew on the 4th of March at Edwards Air Force Base. The total time from contract to first flight was less than 1 year. Though development of the F-104 was never a secret, only a vague description of the aircraft was given when the United States Air Force first revealed its existence. No photographs of the aircraft were released to the public until 1956, even though the XF-104 first flew in 1954. At the April 1956 public unveiling of the YF-104A, the engine inlets were obscured with metal covers. Visible weapons, including the M61 Vulcan cannon, were also hidden. Despite the secrecy, an artist's rendering of the yet unseen F-104 appeared in the September 1954 edition of Popular Mechanics that was very close to the actual design. The prototype made a hop into the air during a taxi trials on 28th of February 1954 and flew about 5 feet, or 1.5 meters off the ground for a short distance, but this was not counted as a first flight. On the 4th of March, Lockheed test pilot Tony Levier flew the XF-104 for its first official flight. He was airborne for only 21 minutes, much shorter than planned due to landing gear retraction problems. Second prototype was destroyed several weeks later during a gun-firing trials when the hatch to the ejector seat blew out, depressurizing the cockpit and causing the pilot to eject in mistaken belief that the cannon mishap had crippled the aircraft. Nevertheless, on the 1st of November 1955, the remaining XF-104 was accepted by the United States Air Force. Legend. Based on the testing and evaluations of the XF-104, the next variant, the YF-104A, was lengthened and fitted with General Electric J79 engine, modified landing gear, and modified air intakes. The YF-104A and subsequent models were 5 feet 6 inches longer than the XF-104 to accommodate larger GE, the General Electric J79 engine. YF-104 initially flew without the GE XJ79 GE3 turbojet, which generated 9,300 pounds of dry thrust, 14,800 with afterburner, which was later replaced by the J79 GE3A with an improved afterburner. 17 YF-104As were ordered by the United States Air Force on the 30th of March, 1955. What a wonderful day of the year. For further flight testing. The first of them flew on the 17th of February, 1956, and with the other 16 trial aircraft. It was soon carrying out aircraft and equipment evaluations and tests. On the 1st of May, 1957, one of the prototypes was destroyed when the ailerons malfunctioned, resulting in the aircraft tumbling wildly. The pilot ejected safely. Lockheed made several improvements to the YF-104A throughout its testing period, including strengthening the airframe, adding a ventral fin to improve directional stability at supersonic speed, and installing a boundary layer control system to reduce landing speed. Problems were encountered with the J79 afterburner. Further delays were caused by the need to add AIM-9 Sidewinder air-to-air missiles. On the 28th of January 1958, the first production F-104A to enter service was delivered to the 83rd Fighter Interceptor Wing. In response to a 1957 German Air Staff paper asking for a single aircraft to fulfill its fighter, bomber, and reconnaissance mission requirements, Lockheed redesigned the entire airframe, including 96 new forgings, additional skin panels, and reinforced landing gear with larger tires and improved brakes. The proposed F-104G for Germany, Super Starfighter, featured a more powerful J79 11A engine, a larger tail with powered rudder, the same used on two-seat F-104B and D, improved blown flaps with a mode for improved maneuverability, electric de-icing equipment for the air intake inlets, and a larger drag chute. Avionics were improved as well, primarily with the Aerodynamic F-15A NASA RR North American Search and Range Radar, multi-mode radar, and the LN3 Inertial Navigation System by Litton Industries, the first such system to be placed into operational service. Altogether, these changes increased the amount of external weapons that could be carried to 3,000 pounds and also allowed the aircraft to fulfill the NATO requirement of carrying a 2,000-pound special store nuclear weapon under the fuselage. Dang. The multinational consortium formed a central coordination office named NASMO, NATO Starfighter Management Office, in Koblenz, Germany, which succeeded in achieving a high level of standardization and cooperation. This was evidenced by an F-104G being assembled in April 1963 at Erding Air Base in Germany, consisting of components constructed in all 4 European partner countries. However, this central coordination resulted in long delays in implementing needed modifications and upgrades. Some of the modifications that were proposed during the time, mainly from the Joint Test Force at Edwards Air Force Base in California, were the installation of an arrestor hook, a standby altitude indicator, and the emergency engine nozzle closure system. In all, 2,578 F-104s were produced by Lockheed and under licenses by various foreign manufacturers. F-104 Starfighter. The Starfighter's airframe was all metal, primarily duralumin, with some stainless steel and titanium. The fuselage was approximately 2.5 times as long as the airplane's wingspan. The wings were centered on a horizontal reference plane or along the longitudinal centerline of the fuselage, and were located substantially further aft on the fuselage than most contemporary designs. The aft fuselage was elevated from the horizontal reference plane, resulting in a lifted tail, and the nose was drooped. This caused the aircraft to fly nose up, helping to minimize drag. As a result, the pilot tube, air inlet scopes, and engine thrust line were all canted slightly from the center line of the fuselage. The F-104 featured a radical wing design. Most jet fighters of the period used a swept wing or a delta wing, which balanced aerodynamic performance, lift, and internal space for fuel and equipment. The Lockheed tests determined that most efficient shape for high-speed supersonic flight was very small and thin, straight, mid-mounted trapezoidal wing. Much of the data on the wing shape was derived from testing done with the experimental unmanned Lockheed X-7, which used a wing of similar shape. The leading edge of the wing was swept back at 26 degrees, with the trailing edge swept forward by a slightly smaller amount. The new wing design was extremely thin, with a thickness to chord ratio of only 3.36% and an aspect ratio of 2.45. The wing's leading edges were so thin that they were a hazard to ground crews. Hence, protective guards were installed on them during maintenance. The thinness of the wings required fuel tanks and landing gear to be placed in the fuselage, and hydraulic cylinders driving the ailerons were limited to 1-inch thickness to fit. The small, highly loaded wing caused an unacceptably high landing speed, even after adding both leading and trailing edge flaps. Thus, designers developed a boundary layer control system, or BLCS, of high-pressure bleed air, which was blown over the trailing edge flaps to lower landing speeds by more than 30 knots. Help make it much safer. Safer indeed. Flapless landings would be without the BLCS engaged, as flaps in the land position were required for its operation. Landing without the BLCS engaged was only done in emergencies and could be a harrowing experience, especially at night. The stabilator. Fully moving horizontal stabilizer was mounted atop the fin to reduce inertia coupling. Because the vertical fin was only slightly shorter than the length of each wing and nearly as aerodynamically effective, it could act as a wing-on-rudder application, rolling the aircraft in the opposite direction of the rudder input. To offset this effect, the wings were canted downward at 10 degrees negative dihedral angle. This downward canting also improved roll control during high-G maneuvers common in air-to-air combat. And finally, the fuselage had a high fineness ratio. It was slender, tapered towards the sharp nose, and had a small frontal area. The tightly packed fuselage contained the radar, cockpit, cannon, fuel, landing gear, and engine. The fuselage and wing combination proved low drag except at high angle of attack, at which point induced drag became very high. The F-104 had a good acceleration, rate of climb, and top speed, but its sustained turn performance was poor. A quote-unquote clean F-104 could sustain a 7G turn below 5,000 feet with a full afterburner. Given the aircraft's prodigious fuel consumption at the altitude, and relatively small fuel capacity, such a maneuver would dramatically reduce its time on station.